Did Bayley win the Women's Royal Rumble? I hope so. I love Bayley.
Bayley is going to WrestleMania!
Vindication!
There's an old town road with mystery of Tom the poet and his muse, and a magic lake which gave a life to the words the poet used.
Hello Internet, this is your captain speaking, and I hope you're ready to shine a light upon this night of otherworldly fiends, because this time I'm looking at Alan Wake, an action-adventure horror game developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by Microsoft in 2010. More specifically, I'm looking at Alan Wake Remastered, released in 2021. Alan Wake was the first game released by Remedy since they sold the rights to Max Payne to Rockstar after Max Payne 2, and their development struggles are evident in the fact that Max Payne 2 came out in 2003, and Alan Wake wouldn't come out until 7 years later. For reference, the entire Arkham series came out in 7 years. The game was originally intended to be an open-world experience, though that was scrapped when they struggled to mesh it with the story they had created, instead focusing on a narrative-driven experience and reusing the assets they had made as the setting. This game would also mark the beginning of the Remedy connected universe, hence why I'm starting here and not with Max Payne, despite occasional references here and there. Also, I have not played Alan Wake 2 at the time of writing this, as this review is intended to catch people up on the story of the first without spoiling the second, so if you are worried about that, have no fear. Just make sure you grab a flashlight so we can give it everything we've got! The game begins with narration, as famous writer Alan Wake tells us that horror stories shouldn't have concrete explanations. So that's a great sign of what's to come. We catch up with Alan in a dream as he crashes his car right into a hitchhiker. Oh, those protesters in the streets better watch out, or the last thing they'll see is a man in a tweed jacket driving full speed towards them. Alan turns his head when his car's lights go off and turns back around to see the dead man disappear, thus beginning Episode 1, Nightmare. He feels drawn to the nearby lighthouse, but no sooner than he starts his trek, there's a hitchhiker back and now shrouded in darkness and lurching towards him with an axe. It's also right here that Alan can stumble upon the first of 3 QR codes hidden throughout the game. Originally exclusive to the PC version of the original game leading to fun content, they've been updated and replaced in the remaster to instead tease Alan Wake 2. But more about these visions later. We've got an axe murderer to run from, which is probably more important. Oh, and now he's caught up with us! Luckily, Alan has some sick epic gamer dodge moves that upset the guy so much he turns into a tornado. I've had weirder dreams. This is when we get the introduction to sprinting, and I'm not kidding when I say that Alan Wake can only run for literally 10 seconds before he runs out of breath. I get that he's a writer and all, and I know from experience that it's not a very physically demanding job, but 10 seconds is a little extreme. I'm just saying, Alan, with the fear of death in you, you might want to extend that to 20, 25, hell, I'll even take 15. Alan runs to the helping hand of Clay Stewart, author of the Alan Wake files that came with the collector's edition of the game. He dies immediately. Aw man, we didn't even get an hour and 15-minute look at his life in the darkness apocalypse as he forms a relationship with a stranger who then dies. Oh, this game isn't getting any award nominations now. Oh wait, Alan's ramshackle shack shelter isn't going to last long, but a burst of light and the detached voice of God come to his aid, healing him with light and sharing a very important message.
For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home lies a deeper, darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I beam. To its ports I beam. Do you understand?
No.
Really? Poetry? Why not just tell him what's so important instead of dancing around it with flowery language and metaphors? Luckily, the combat tutorial isn't conveyed in a haiku. The light just tells Alan that the hitchhiker has been taken over by something called the Dark Presence, and that it's invulnerable unless a light is shown on it. Once the darkness is burned away, he can be killed. But if you prefer it in haiku form, burn away darkness, weaken them with your flashlight, shoot them in the face. The light gives Alan his dream back, leaving him alone awake to experience this game's combat loop. Burn the darkness away, shoot the enemies, dodge their attacks, and run to create distance. The only problem is that these are the weakest fucking flashlight batteries known to man. You can focus the flashlight to burn the darkness faster, but it drains the rechargeable battery at the goddamn speed of light. Fun fact, in the original Alan Wake, the batteries he picks up are Energizer branded batteries. That was ditched in this one, either because they didn't have the product partnership anymore, or because Energizer supervisor didn't want their names attached to batteries that last just barely longer than this guy in bed. A bit further on, Alan can find a flare gun. These work as panic mode crowd control, burning the darkness and killing all the enemies in the vicinity in one shot. He runs from the tornado into the lighthouse, and Alan wakes up next to his wife, Alice Wake, as they arrive in the small town of Bright Falls, Washington. Alice organized this vacation to help Alan get over his writer's block following the conclusion of his famous book series following hardened New York City detective Alex Casey, which he ended 2 years ago by killing Casey. Their ferry ride is joined by Pat Main, a local radio host, along with a hunter man chilling in the back. As those of you who watch my videos regularly know, I'm always bringing up things that totally won't be important at any point later.
You lying?
They arrive in town following a phone call from Alan's agent Barry Wheeler, the two of them being only the second most popular combination of the names Barry and Alan. They're off the ferry in a flash and head to the Oh Dear Diner to pick up their cabin key from their landlord Carl Stuckey. Alice drops Alan off and he walks in to see that he's arrived already. That cutout is the proud property of the waitress Rose, who says that Carl must be in the bathroom. The other patrons in the diner are park ranger Rusty, the crazy old Anderson brothers, and a crazy woman named Cynthia Weaver freaking out about the flickering hallway light, warning Alan that he can get hurt in the dark and that Carl didn't follow her warning. Well, given Alan's dream and all the tutorials, I'm sure she's just out of her mind.
I'm in danger!
Wake doesn't find Carl in the back, but someone else arrives to give him his key.
Carl couldn't make it. Unfortunately, he was taken ill. But I have the key for you and instructions on how to get to the lake.
Okay.
I wish you a good stay in my cabin. I'll come by later to check how you've settled in. And to meet your wife. I insist.
Thanks.
If I went on vacation and this person gave me my key, I wouldn't be like, thanks. I'd be like,
Fuck it.
Alan sort of recreates the second part of that, driving off with Alice towards the cabin as Carl stumbles out of the diner with their key, clearly not feeling well. I'd say their demise is a lock at this point.
I've been researching comedy for the past 50 years, and I've genuinely never seen a joke this bad.
They arrive at Diver's Isle, where Bird Leg Cabin is situated, called that because the island looks like a bird's leg. Very clever, I know. Alan explores the cabin looking for a way to get the lights on, as Alice is deathly afraid of the dark. Guess that answers that question. Alan says the cabin looks right out of the 60s, and if this took place in the 90s instead of 2010, he absolutely would have said the 60s called they want their cabin back. Once they get situated, Alice reveals a typewriter, saying she arranged this whole trip so Alan could meet with the local doctor Emil Hartman to help get him writing again. This upsets Alan as he's tired of everyone hounding him about writing. I know what that's like. He storms out of the cabin, needing time alone to clear his head. But that time is cut short when the power shorts. Alice screams, cutting through the night as Alan rushes back inside and sees that Alice fell into Cauldron Lake, diving after her.
Keep going, Alan. Wake up.
Alice?
Oh god no, is this Inception rules? Alan crawls out of the car and sees a gas station in the distance, but he's got to trek through the forest to get there. Not even a minute into his journey, he finds another wrinkle to this mystery.
The loose sheets of paper were pages from a manuscript entitled Departure. That was the name I planned to use for the next novel I had never gotten started. I was named the author. I hadn't written it. I couldn't remember writing it. In the scene on the page, the hero was attacked by an axe murderer in the woods at night.
Oh, and wouldn't you know it, he soon comes across an axe murderer. Wow! It's Carl Stuckey, covered in darkness like the people from his dream. He chases Wake into a small office that just so happens to be equipped with a flashlight and a revolver, Alan grabbing those shortly before the office is pushed off a cliff. What fun! As he goes on, he starts seeing bright yellow paint that's only visible in the light, guiding him to chests full of ammo and giving him helpful tips like the darkness controls the Taken. The Taken being the official name for the enemies Alan's coming across. Lumbering closer to the lumber yard, Alan finds a TV that plays an episode of an old show called Night Springs, a very thinly veiled copy of The Twilight Zone that Alan Wake wrote a few episodes for. And now we move on to the first boss fight of the game, as Alan has to take out Mr. Stuckey and free him from the darkness limbo he's Stuckey in. If you want to end this fight in less time than it takes Alan to run out of breath, just shoot a flare at him and he dies immediately. With Carl down, Alan finally makes it to the gas station, where a countdown to the town's annual Deer Fest shows that a whole week went by that he has no memory of, as it was 14 days away when they arrived in Bright Falls, and now it's only 7 days away. Oh, this game would be so much better if it took place in 2011. Surprisingly though, that's not the weirdest revelation contained in this one gas station.
I'll write. I'll keep writing. Outside there's only darkness. Outside the cabin, outside the story, there's only darkness. I can feel her presence in the dark. Just now, I could smell her perfume in the room. I'll reach her, I'll fix it up. I'll bring her back. The story will come true. If I stop, she's lost.
Bah, that's a future problem. Let's focus on calling the sheriff and trying to stop the whole army of darkness invading the town and trying to kill me thing first. Sheriff Sarah Breaker arrives, no doubt the older sister of Braun Breaker, and tells Alan that the cabin they just stayed in, along with the island it was on, was destroyed in the 70s by the volcano under the lake, and takes Wake to the lake to prove it. So the cabin was a fake? Thus ends episode 1 and carries us swiftly into episode 2. Taken. We flash back 3 years where beardless Alan looks about 10 years older as he returns to their New York City apartment. You would think a dink writer with his particular set of skills and 5 world-famous novels would have a bigger place. The power goes out, scaring Alice, and Alan cheers her up by telling her the story of the Clicker, an old light switch given him by his mom to use in the darkness to defeat the monsters.
That's a surprise tool that can help us later.
And this zoom-out shot of the exterior of their apartment with the police lights in the snow is unironically the most beautiful shot in the game. Back in the present, Alan is checked up on by a doctor in the police department and gets his phone back from the sheriff, soon receiving a call from someone claiming to have kidnapped Alice, backed up by Alan hearing her voice on the other end. The kidnapper wants to meet at Elderwood National Park, and leads Alan to find Alice's driver's license to show he means business. And on his way back inside, he gets another message.
A writer is a light that reveals the world of his story from darkness, shapes it from nothingness. The way a sculptor carves a statue from a block of granite. If I stop, the world I'm making dies. Darkness will reclaim it. It's a long, hard journey into the dark. Alice's life is at stake, but I can't think about that, or I'll lose it. The dread lingers at the edge of perception. I'll push on. Anything is possible here. I'll write the story. I'll save her.
Let's drop!
Dr. Emil Hartman has arrived in the lobby, and Alan wastes no time in clocking the smug doctor as soon as he admits to being the reason Alice brought them to Bright Falls, prompting the arrival of Alan's agent Barry Wheeler, who flew out to Bright Falls after Alan went dark for a week. I don't exactly know where he got his sense of fashion from, but I hope no one else catches it.
What the fuck are you wearing?
On their way to check into a cabin at Elderwood Park, Alan tells Barry everything he's gone through. Barry doesn't believe him, because why would he?
You calling me a liar?
I ain't calling you a truther.
But he's interested in the manuscript he wrote. I guess he's not caught up on the whole the manuscript pages are describing real events that happen soon after Alan finds them part because he smells money. I'll let you decide if businessmen ignoring obvious risk and danger to pursue money is exclusive to fiction or not. It's not. They get the cabin key from Rusty as he tends to a dog that got caught in a bear trap and hide out in there until nightfall, when Alan heads out to meet with the kidnapper, Barry reluctantly going along with his plan and staying behind. Annoyingly, the gear you find in one chapter does not carry over to the other. You start fresh with whatever the game wants you to have. A commotion at the visitor center draws Wake's attention, and he arrives to see Rusty not looking too great. How would you look at that? Someone thought the term circuit breaker was a title you earn, so restoring the power isn't an option. However, Rusty gets dragged off by the darkness immediately, so it probably wouldn't have changed much. It might have saved the dog though. Oh, come on, game. Rusty's been taken by the darkness, so Wake has to put him down before he can progress. If you want to have a really easy time with this fight, bring a can of Rust-Oleum. As he continues on the trail to the meeting point, I'd like to mention that running away from enemies is a completely valid strategy. You get nothing out of killing them, so you can just stun them with your flashlight and book it to the next safe haven checkpoint.
I hate when people underestimate my fastness.
I'm pretty sure that's basically required on the hardest difficulty. Further down the path, he is saved from a group of Taken by Bill Mott, the hunter on the ferry from earlier, after his lift crashes. He loses his gun, but Mott gives him some flares to use instead. Flares are a great way to deal with getting surrounded by Taken, as the Taken will be unable to attack you while you're holding it or near its light. Mott says he's helping Wake to the meeting spot because that's how the story goes, and Wake deduces almost immediately that Mott must be the kidnapper because no one aside from Barry knows about the plan. They make their way to the lookout and work together to defeat the Taken, and then immediately turn on each other as Alan asks where his wife is. And it seems Mott put together that Wake's departure manuscript is foretelling the future, demanding the whole shebang in exchange for Alice. So Alan just punches him in the face and they fall down, giving Mott just enough time to start running. Alan has to balance chasing after him with avoiding the aforementioned bear traps that pinch Max, not to mention the ever-present threat of the Taken. He has no choice but to give up on his search for Mott, instead having to return to the cabin to help Barry fend off the murder of murderous crows attacking it. Luckily, he comes across a campground with a working car, though he needs to find the keys first.
A story is not a machine that does what you tell it. A story is a beast with a life of its own. You can create it, shape it, but as the story grows, it starts wanting things of its own. Change one thing and you set off a chain reaction of events that spreads through the whole thing. The characters have to be true to themselves. The events need to follow a logic that fits the story. A single flaw and the magic is gone. The story dies. Alice dies.
Pretty weird, champ, not gonna lie. With the keys in hand, Alan is free to swerve on out of there into a new gameplay mechanic that kinda reduces the atmosphere. A lot. The lights on the car and the car's battery work like a flashlight, but you don't even really need them. You can just zoom past all the Taken and reach the next checkpoint. You can run over them too, though the car will break down if it sustains enough damage.
I know a shortcut right here. That's not the shortcut. That's not the shortcut, I'm sorry.
I get that Alan Wake is more of an action game with horror undertones similar to BioShock in that regard, but it eases the tension a bit too much, though it is nice to get around faster than a light jog. Alan gets a phone call from Mott on the way back, still demanding the manuscript in exchange for Alice, giving Wake only 2 days to finish it and bring it to the coal mine after he says it isn't done yet. Now back at the cabin, he fends off the crows and reunites with Barry, now firmly believing Alan was telling the truth the whole time. The next morning, Barry goes off to investigate the kidnapper and possibly find some answers on the missing island, while Alan struggles to finish the manuscript he doesn't even remember writing. Which is fair. I mean, you try writing the end of the story after reading, like, a couple pages. Though his problems seem to be solved when Barry gets a call from Rose, Alan Wake's biggest fan, claiming to have the missing manuscript pages. The day is saved!
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the Oh Dear Diner.
Good girl.
The day is endangered once more! Thus ends episode 2, with episode 3, Ransom, picking up as the two arrive outside the trailer park Rose lives in. As they're escorted to Rose's trailer, Barry tells Alan all about the information he found about Bright Falls. Stories of disappearances and urban legends coming true, all stemming from Cauldron Lake. And the missing island Alan stayed on used to belong to a supposedly famous writer and director named Thomas Zane. However, Barry couldn't find a single reference to him or anything he wrote online. According to the story, Zane went down with the island when the volcano under Cauldron Lake erupted in 1970, which occurred 1 week after Zane's girlfriend, Barbara Jagger, drowned in the lake. And all of this was scribed by Cynthia Weaver, that lady of the light gone mad with the night from the Oh Dear Diner earlier. They head inside Rose's trailer and are almost immediately drugged. Oh god, no, please no more confusing dreams.
It's coming for you, hiding in my barber's skin. I'm too weak to stop it. You must turn the lights on.
I promised I'd come visit you, Ansley wife. You must finish what you started. I insist.
You must turn the lights on. Turn the light on.
To summarize these broken dreams, the detached voice of light coming from the diving suit is Thomas Zane, and the dark presence haunting Alan has taken the form of Zane's girlfriend, Barbara Jagger. Alan Wake's American nightmare comes to an end and he wakes up to his starring television role. This episode features Alan talking about how Barbara Jagger was his editor for the manuscript he doesn't remember writing, promising Alan he can get Alice back through writing it as she helped Thomas Zane before him. Also making heavy edits to the story, altering it into a horror story. Leaving the weird Alan shrine, he finds, to his misery, that Rose kept them captive for a whole day, though Alan acknowledges that it's not Rose's fault, clearly affected and influenced by something else. With only 12 hours before he has to meet the killer, he has to head back to his car and think of a plan on the fly, hopefully unobstructed by any more unforeseen roadblocks.
This is Agent Nightingale, FBI! Get him up, Hemingway! You're under arrest! You move a muscle, I'll unload right in your goddamn face! Stay right where you are, Slane!
Was 12 hours of peace too much to ask for? Agent Trigger Happy over here had arrived in Bright Falls yesterday looking for Wake, with Sarah calling to arrange a meeting between the two. Randolph here called the cops when Alan and Barry spent an entire day in Rose's trailer, and Agent Drunk Tank is so determined to apprehend Alan because he blames him for his partner becoming one of the Taken. All caught up? Good. Wake runs through the forest to escape the police, setting his sights on Pat Maine's radio station in the distance as his destination, though his progress is impeded by a gate possessed by darkness. So, possessed objects are a thing now, usually in the form of crap being thrown directly at Alan's face. Yeah! They function differently than the regular Taken. They disappear as soon as you burn the darkness away. Alan has nothing to defend himself with at the moment, so it's a good thing someone just left a flashlight and some flashbang grenades behind.
It's a bomb!
Yeah! Flashbangs basically work the same as the flare gun. You drop one in a group of enemies and it will instantly kill any nearby. This whole stretch basically teaches you the values of booking it away from enemies, since your methods of self-defense are extremely limited. Alan makes it to the radio station, but Agent Shoot is shot and Sheriff Breaker are right behind him, and another errant shot sends Wake crashing back into the forest, having to find his way to the mines on his own.
And then I fired again, and then I missed, and then I fired, and then I fired, and I missed. I missed both times.
On his way there, he receives a very important phone call.
The most stubborn man I've ever met.
Alice? Alice?
Alan. Alan. I'm so afraid. It keeps me in the dark. Please help me. I look at you, Alan, and it's not you. It's something else. Looking out from behind your eyes.
Alice, I'm here.
I'm so alone here. It's all gonna go to hell. You need to be careful. Cooperate.
I can't be the only one who is reminded of this, right?
Hello?
Hi, Barbie. It's Ken. I miss you. It's so quiet after you die. There's nothing. But the voices, they never stop. See you in an hour.
Alan arrives at a train depot in hopes of finding a car, coming across the first heavy-duty flashlight, an upgrade to the flashlight that has a longer battery life. And this game doesn't give you things and not expect you to use them immediately. And in this instance, it's a possessed tractor that Alan has to vanquish. This fight can really suck if you don't know what you're doing. The tractor is hard to avoid, it pushes other objects at you, and there are Taken thrown into the mix as well. But staying away from them and keeping your beam on the tractor constantly, as well as using flares for bonus damage, will have that tractor tipped in no time. His reward is a car ready and able to take him to the coal mine as the sun rises. He reaches the meeting place and waits there all day, only to get a call from Mott as the sun sets where he changes the meeting point to Mirror Peak. Fighting through Taken and Taken objects, he finds the next episode of his favorite show.
Anything outside of writing is a struggle. I feel ill. I managed to make my way downstairs. There's a shoebox filled with books and papers by Thomas Zane. It's very hard to focus, but I managed to read some of it. He's a poet, and a good one. He writes of muses and creators summoning fabulous things from a magic lake, using his powers to shape the world of a realm of gods and dreams and demons, dark things that wait for a chance to slip through, wearing the flesh of men as disguise. Zane writes about himself, his girlfriend being taken over by a dark presence, about growing scared of the lake. Zane believes it's a mirror to the gaping void of darkness above, where some Lovecraftian presence lurks. I crawl back upstairs. I'll borrow these things for my story. They ring true. They fit.
He crosses the mountains and through a whole mine to reach this meeting point, and I'd like to mention that there's a trophy for doing this whole stretch in 30 minutes or less. I don't even know how you do that. He arrives just in time to see Mott, clearly being affected by the dark presence, get scooped up in the dark tornado that's been stalking him. Alan gets carried off into it as well, though lights a flare to save himself, falling down into Cauldron Lake as episode 3 ends. Episode 4, The Truth, begins with Alan waking up in Dr. Hartman's Cauldron Lake Lodge after a vision of his wife turns into the Doctor, which has to be the biggest downgrade since Velma went from this to this, or since April O'Neil went from this to this, or since Rocksteady went from this to this, Or since Dr. Hartman takes Alan for a walk through the lodge while he explains that Alice drowned in Cauldron Lake and that everything Alan has gone through has been nothing more than paranoid delusions. Alan, of course, doesn't believe this. He then meets some of Hartman's other patients, including the Anderson brothers from earlier, former members of the band The Old Gods of Asgard, and they've got a message for Alan once Hartman leaves.
Oh, he'd love to fish out our secrets, but he has no clue. He's not crazy enough. Not crazy like us, Sonny. Yeah! Being crazy's a requirement, Sonny. Who else could understand the world when it's like this? It takes crazy to know crazy.
That's the sanest thing I've heard in a while.
Zane! You're all right, Tom. Hey, we like him, don't we, bro? He's got to go to the farm.
The Anderson farm. Valhalla!
We wrote it all down, lest we forget. A crash course. All you need to know to get your head right. You need to find the message.
Here, Sonny, here's something for you. Gave me a rash, but I kept it safe from these bastards.
The manuscript page reveals that Dr. Hartman used to be Thomas Zane's assistant while he was living in Bright Falls, and if Alan sticks around after the conversation, he'll hear the brothers talk about how Cauldron Lake is a place of power for creators, and that Alan fully opened the door in the lake that they had cracked open.
Tom just lost is all. Baba Yaga got to him too, the damn witch.
Oh yeah, man, Baba Yaga got him so bad he turned into him in the sequel. The nurses want Alan to go back to his room and write some more, but he'd rather watch TV.
Something's wrong. I'm not myself. It's hard to think that there's a shadow inside my head. I can only focus on writing. Everything else is a blur. I'm trapped in this cabin, have been for days, but it's always dark outside. My editor is real. I saw her again. She's not human. It's not human. A dark presence is wearing the old woman's face. She was covered in clinging shadows. There's a hole in her chest where her heart should be. I think I've made a horrible mistake. I don't think I'm any closer to saving Alice. It's been lying to me, using me to get the story it wants, and the story will come true.
The pieces are starting to come together, but we're just over halfway there, so strap in. A commotion in the lodge involving the old gods of Asgard smacking a nurse on the head with a hammer allows Alan to sneak out of his room and get full access to the lodge, where he discovers a recorded conversation between Dr. Hartman and Alice, the phone call that led Alice bringing Alan to Bright Falls in the first place. He pieces together that the phone call he received from Alice last night was cut together from this conversation.
He's the most stubborn man I've ever met. He's the most stubborn man I've ever met. I'm so afraid. He keeps me in the dark. I'm so afraid I'm gonna lose him. He just keeps me in the dark. Please help me. I look at you, Alan, and it's not you. Something else. Looking out from behind your eyes. I want to say, I look at you, and it's not you. Just some stranger who resembles you. Looking out from behind your eyes, always going on about something else. I'm so alone here. It's all gonna go to hell. You need to be careful. Cooperate. I'm so alone here, and now it's all gonna go to hell. You need to be careful with him. He's not just going to listen to you and cooperate.
Confirming that Mott was working for Hartman to get the manuscript pages and that they never had Alice. I mean, it was already confirmed by the spoilery manuscript pages, but where's the fun in revealing that ahead of time? And in case you weren't convinced, there's a photo of Hartman and Mott hanging on the wall right outside that room.
If only they would have left some sort of clue!
Finally, you've probably pieced this together already, but Dr. Hartman pulled Alan out of Cauldron Lake when he fell into it last night. Alan finds Barry outside Hartman's office, having been thrown in there after Hartman lured him to the lodge. Oh, and he stole the cutout from the diner to get revenge on Rose. Yeah, I'd say we're even now. Oh, what, you drugged us and stole 1 day of our lives? Well, I stole your fucking cardboard. Bitch. They enter the office and retrieve Alan's gun and his manuscript pages, including some new ones, before forcing Hartman to drop the act. He tries to convince Alan to work with him to use his power, but Alan's counteroffer is locking the doctor in the office with the dark presence, and he's not budging on it. He will, however, throw in the most smug grin known to man.
We do a little trolling.
Alan escapes the lodge and makes it to the front gate, but it's locked, and Barry says he has to pass through the hedge maze to get outside, passing him the flashlight so he has some sort of defense. He makes it through the maze and the garden, having to stand his ground while Barry fumbles with the key to the door. Once he butt fumbles his way to opening the door, they're on the fast track to the Anderson farm, and I really like Barry's response here.
Al, please tell me we're headed for the nearest "You're now leaving Bright Falls. Come back soon" sign.
We're going to the Anderson farm.
I knew you were gonna say something like that. You know what? You owe me big time for this. When this is through, if we make it, I don't care what anybody says, I'm done with darkness. You're gonna buy me a tanning bed as a gift, and I'm gonna live in it.
Not because it's funny or anything, but it shows Barry's character. He didn't fight Alan or try to talk him out of it. He knows it's the right thing to do and that they have to do it. Even though he doesn't get along with Alice, he knows Alan loves her, so he's willing to do whatever it takes to help him get her back. And now it's time for Alan Wake to do my job for me and explain what's been going on this whole time.
They never had Alice. She's trapped in the darkness at the bottom of the lake, but she's not dead. I can bring her back. I can find her. There's something special about this place. The lake, it does something to the works of art created here. It makes them come true. But there's a catch. The dark presence, whatever that thing is, twists it to its own ends. That's why all of this is happening. It's using my manuscript to take over everything.
Al, I believe you.
It happened to Thomas Zane before it happened to the Andersons. The Andersons knew about it, but they were too far gone to tell me with all the drugs they were on. But they wrote it down. There's a message somewhere at their farm.
Oh man, how am I going to eventually profit off this if Alan keeps doing my job for me? Maybe if you hit that like button and that subscribe button. Did they light up? Apparently they do that now. No? Alright. His punishment for doing my job for me is being run off the road by falling rocks, getting split up from Barry in the crash. Barry landed closer to the farm, so he promises to secure the area while Alan finds a way down the cliff. As he fights his way through more darkness, a burst of light and the shadow of Thomas Zane in his diving suit say they've been trying to tell him how the story goes by delivering pages at the appropriate times, proving as much by dropping him a page that says the dark presence has to follow the story as it's written. His path brings him to Walter's house, who was locked up in the police department earlier, looking better than he does now. At least he was watching some interesting TV before he got attacked.
I've run through every possible course in my head. If I continue like the dark presence wants me to, the story I'm writing won't save Alice. It's a horror story, and it's going to kill her, and me, and everybody in this town. No one will survive. Darkness will consume everything. This is what it's wanted all along. It will be free, unstoppable. It used Alice to get to me, dangled her in front of me to keep me going. It was never going to release her. I'm going to change this. I'll escape. I've written myself into the story. I'm now the protagonist. This feels like a terrible risk, but it's the only way to save Alice. I'll be bound by the events of the story just as much as anyone else who's been woven into it. The story must stay true for this to work. There have to be victims along the way, near escapes, cliffhangers. In a horror story, it can't be certain that the hero will succeed or even survive. He almost has to die. I'll write my own escape into the story next. I need help. Zane's going to be the one who'll help me. I'll make it happen.
Okay, you've all definitely put it together by now, but just give me a minute. Trust me on this. Alan steals Walt's car, he won't be needing it, and drives to the farm, unprepared for the sheer badassery that is to come.
Incoming! There's too many of them!
God damn.
In what is by far the best part of the game, Alan has to defend himself and Barry on the stage while Barry controls the fireworks for assistance, all while Children of the Elder God by the Old Gods of Asgard, the in-game name for the real band Poets of the Fall, blares over the speakers. Unfortunately, I can't play it for you because copyright sucks. Once the night has been successfully rocked, they're free to continue exploring the farm, eventually having to fight a giant combine tractor, frankly the scariest part of the game for players who grew up on cars. Once they make it to the Andersons' house, they find the message they were looking for in the form of another song, this one called The Poet and the Muse, telling Alan that he needs to find Cynthia Weaver, as she holds the key to stopping the dark presence and freeing Alice from Cauldron Lake.
Find the lady of the light, gone mad with the night.
They decide to wait out the night in the house, treating themselves to the Andersons' famous homemade moonshine, and since one of the ingredients is water from Cauldron Lake, it unlocks a suppressed memory. Alan didn't find Alice when he dove into the lake. The dark presence appeared in front of him and started manipulating him, telling him he could write her back to him as long as he had her help, since Cauldron Lake has the power to make what's written come true. He spent the missing week in the dark place writing The Departure, thinking he was getting Alice back, not knowing it was all the dark presence's plan to escape the dark place and take control. However, Thomas Zane was his saving grace, leaving behind just enough for Alan to write his escape into the story, writing that Thomas Zane and the light frees him from the dark place so he can be the protagonist of the story. Zane is stealing the manuscript pages in the process and handing them back to Alan when he needs them. That's why the dark presence has been hunting Alan this whole time. It needs him to finish the story so it can escape, and Thomas Zane, or at least what's left of him, has been the guiding light helping him fight the darkness.
It's been 5 years. You still owe me $16.
Man, you know, between Alan Wake needing to finish his story and having an American Nightmare, I'm beginning to think this must be Cody Rhodes' favorite game, right? I'll go over the whole backstory of Thomas Zane and Cauldron Lake a bit later. For now, Alan wakes up to the pleasant sight of Agent Two-Way's gun in his face, marking the end of episode 4 and the start of episode 5, The Clicker. No, this is not The Last of Us. People actually like Sam Lake. Barry Wheeler and Alan wake up in a jail cell, though Sarah opens the door when Alan starts to have another vision, and Nightingale, having read all the manuscript pages, doesn't approve, though he's pulled away by the darkness before he can elaborate. Luckily, he left his pages behind.
Nightingale tried to make sense of the manuscript. It was disjointed and strange. He didn't understand half of it, but it all rang true. Impossibly true. He took out his hip flask when he reached the page that described how he reached the page that made him take out his hip flask. It wasn't the booze that made his mind reel. Nightingale felt the situation veering out of his control, but the gun at least felt steady in his hands. He was ready to fire, resolved that he would let this happen over his dead body. And yet he hesitated. He had seen this moment before, read it in the page. He was transfixed by the déjà vu and the horror that he was a character in a story someone had written. Then the monstrous presence burst in behind him and dragged him into the night.
Well, that only gets more perplexing the longer you think about it, but hey, Sarah finally saw what's going on, so now we have someone on the squad actually trained with firearms.
Did you mean to do that?
Yeah. She guides Alan back to his things, except these aren't my things. I had a heavy-duty lantern, aka the strongest flashlight in the game, and I really don't appreciate you losing it, Sarah. She tasks Barry with staying behind and sending out a warning signal to specific people while she and Alan go find Cynthia Weaver. Sarah's plan being to take the helicopter to the old power plant where Cynthia lives, but first they need to get the keys to it from the town hall. Fighting Taken through the streets of Bright Falls is a nice change of pace from the mountainous forests we've almost exclusively been fighting them in. And you can save a lot of ammo here by sticking by Sarah and focusing on burning the darkness off the Taken so they can get taken out by her shotgun.
Yeah, I'm shooting at you now.
They fight to the town hall and retrieve the key just in time to see Barry legging it down the street as it was revealed in a manuscript that the Taken managed to cut the police department's lights. He just manages to avoid getting crushed by a truck by hiding in a store, so they head around back to find him. They don't find Barry, but head in the direction of a flare as bright as his jacket, as it happens to be on the path to the helicopter. They pass through a church and its basement, reuniting with a decked out Barry on the other end. He's got a flashlight, a flare gun, a headlamp, and a string of Christmas lights that are somehow on as a suit of armor. Why Alan never considered buying a headlamp, I have no idea. They make it to the helicopter where Alan has to fend off the Taken while Sarah gets it started, in about the 4th Survive the Assault challenge in about an hour of gameplay. They take off in the chopper and head towards the power plant, planning to land on the other side of the river, though their plan is interrupted by a swarm of shadow birds that send Alan alone tumbling out of the helicopter. Without his guns and flashlight, of course. It's up to him to make it to the plant by himself as Sarah tries to shake the birds, meaning they don't get to experience the mini concert as Alan slays the Taken to the sound of Poets of the Falls song, War. In what is their 4th song to appear in a Remedy game, and the 3rd in this game alone, with the 4th being the credit song for Max Payne 2.
We keep driving into the night. It's a late goodbye.
Alan manages to fight his way to the power plant where Cynthia Weaver is waiting for him, revealing that she is the one who left the caches and the yellow paint everywhere, and saying she has something for him that's being kept in the well-lit room. As they make their way to the well-lit room, Cynthia describes how Thomas Zane tried to use his writing to bring Barbara Jagger back, but all he got was the dark presence wearing the skin of Barbara. When he realized his mistake, he tried to write out all of his writings, himself, and Barbara out of the world. What remains in the well-lit room is one of the few things he left behind, some of the last evidence that Thomas Zane ever existed. Alan has to leave the safe path to the well-lit room when Sarah's helicopter crashes, throwing himself back into danger to find the two of them and save them from a horde of Taken. The three of them taking the dangerous path to the room instead of turning around and going back to the safe way, because game. Alan once again gets separated from them as they take an elevator up, so while they get to take a breather, Alan has to outrun a whole tornado to catch up with them. They finally arrive inside the well-lit room and discover that Thomas Zane's gift, the one thing that can change the course of destiny and defeat the dark presence and evil force from an alternate dimension, is the clicker Alan used in the story to comfort Alice.
Oh, I just found out that Americans call a flicky flicky willy donker a fucking light switch, mate.
Finding a manuscript page written by Thomas Zane about Alan's childhood where his mom used the same clicker when he was afraid of the dark. And if you're wondering how the stuff was saved when he erased everything, he put in a loophole that anything left in a shoebox would be unaffected. However, while it's natural to think that this whole thing might have been the work of Thomas Zane, I think it's way more likely that Alan wrote that Zane wrote that section of the manuscript, using the real story of Thomas Zane and Barbara Jagger in his story to make it more real.
Now you've confused me. Almost immediately.
Anyway, with clicker in hand, it's time for the final episode, Departure. Alan knows that he has to return to Cauldron Lake and use the clicker to defeat the dark presence. So all that's left is to do it. But first, a flashback to 2 years ago. A hungover Alan watches himself on a talk show where he's sitting next to Remedy Entertainment's creative director Sam Lake. At this point, I'd like to bring up that Alan Wake actually has two different actors. His in-game model is based on the Finnish actor Ilkka Ville, I have no idea if I said that right, while his voice is provided by Matthew Peretta. Anyway, Alice comes home and the two talk about Alan's struggles with writer's block before we cut back to present day. Alan's plan is to return to Cauldron Lake and finish the manuscript, and his sunlit drive there is taken over by the dark presence, as it throws everything it can at Alan to prevent his return. And, because the final chapter of the game isn't hard enough on its own, there's a trophy for doing this whole section without firing a single bullet, including the flare gun, meaning you have to do this whole thing with just flares, flashbangs, and a flashlight. Luckily, there are plenty of cars to carry you through the first half of this endurance test, though if you want that trophy, be prepared for lots of dropping bombs and running away. Whether you're going for it or not, Alan fights his way back to Cauldron Lake and takes on the dark tornado, shooting flares into it until it's overtaken by light, freeing him up to dive into Cauldron Lake, waking up in the dark place as Thomas Zane tells Alan to fill the dark presence's heart with light. A reference to when Thomas Zane cut out the dark presence's heart, then sunk down in Cauldron Lake with her to trap it there. He also introduces Alan to a new friend.
Don't mind him. He's Mr. Your friends will meet him when you're gone.
He'll be important later. And confusing, but that's a future problem. Now in the subjective reality of the dark place, Alan wills a path to the cabin and then the cabin itself into existence, confronting the dark presence and jamming the clicker into the hole where its heart used to be, flipping the switch and flooding the presence with light, defeating it for the time being. Then he takes a seat in front of the typewriter, ready to write the ending to Departure. As time rewinds, we go back to Alan diving in after Alice, cutting to her emerging from the lake as the town celebrates Deerfest. The final shot showing Alan trapped in the dark place as we cut to black, and the credits roll to Space Oddity. I know you're probably confused about a few things, so let's start from the top. There is a portal under Cauldron Lake that leads to another dimension filled with darkness. This is where the dark presence comes from. The dark presence, and by extension the dark place, seem to have the power to turn creative works of art into reality. This was seen with Thomas Zane trying to write his girlfriend Barbara Jagger back to life using that power, but instead getting the dark presence wearing Barbara's face. But he closed the door to the dark place by erasing his works and taking the dark presence back to the dark place, getting trapped down there in the process. Then, the old gods of Asgard awoke the dark presence by hanging out near the lake and using its water for their moonshine, creating a connection strong enough for the dark presence to return. However, the brothers were able to fight it off, though, as they said, they still left the door open just a crack. The door was fully opened when Alan and Alice Wake arrived, the dark presence using its weak connection to the real world to drag Alice down into the dark place, and manipulating Alan just enough to convince him to write a story where the dark presence gains enough power to escape the dark place. But Alan eventually figured out he was being manipulated, using the story of Thomas Zane to summon him as his aid, as a force of light that was fighting against the dark. Remedy has said that Alan Wake isn't a god who can create anything, he can just nudge real things into place for his story, so it's more likely that this force of light existed already. Then we flash forward to when Alan finds the clicker and the manuscript page from Thomas Zane about his past. I highly doubt this was all actually a grand scheme by Thomas Zane set 40 years after he disappeared. I think it's some weird dream reality bending logic where Alan wrote that Thomas wrote it, therefore Alan doesn't remember writing it because Alan wrote that he didn't write it.
I think I got it. But just in case, tell me the whole thing again, I wasn't listening.
Everything that took place from the moment Alan woke up after the crash to when he dove into the dark place followed the story he wrote in the manuscript. It seems like every living being, including the dark presence, was bound to the shifted reality created on those pages. And then there's the ending, which was intentionally left vague because it was set up in the opening of the game that concrete answers were not going to be the solution here. Alan talks about sacrifice and balance, how Thomas Zane's mistake in trying to bring Barbara back was that he didn't balance the scales. So it seems the only way for Alan to free Alice was for him to take her place in the dark place, freeing her but keeping him trapped. And given that the page in the typewriter when Alan starts writing is a description of the events that transpired shortly before Alice disappeared, I think it's safe to assume that the end of Departure is time rewinding the 2 weeks prior, with Alan diving into the lake and saving Alice. However, since he's trapped in the dark place, he doesn't emerge with her, or he pulled her out of the dark place and stayed behind so she could escape. Though I'm leaning towards the first one, since it's clear that not everything that happened was undone. The people turned into Taken are still missing. Rose is still affected by her encounter with the dark presence, and Agent Nightingale is there, and possibly affected by the dark presence as well. So I think every living being in the Departure is tied to the events that unfolded, even if time is rewound. And since Alice was trapped in the dark place, she isn't bound to it like the others. Or Alan's sacrifice meant he got to break the rules and free her. All we really know for certain at this point is that Alan Wake ends the story trapped in the dark place. I won't go too in-depth on the two DLCs, The Signal and The Writer, but all you really need to know is that they focus on Alan realizing he has to control his emotions and keep himself whole if he wants to escape the dark place. Then there's the spin-off sort of sequel, Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which reveals that Mr. Scratch, referred to by the narrator as the Herald of Darkness, and Alan Wake as the Champion of Light, is a physical manifestation of rumors that spread after Alan Wake's disappearance that he was a serial killer who killed his wife and the missing citizens of Bright Falls, though it turns out the whole game was a story written by Alan in the dark place as an unsuccessful attempt to escape. It does, however, give us the banger Old Gods of Asgard song Balance Slays the Demon, so there's that. Though we will later learn that Mr. Scratch is very real and very much a threat, but that's a story for another time. For now, it's time to write this final chapter. I find this game exceptionally hard to rate. On one hand, it has some of the clunkiest gameplay I've ever encountered, a terribly unhelpful camera, an annoyingly short sprint time, and a gameplay loop that can best be described as jogs through forest. But on the other hand, it has one of the most fascinating stories I've ever seen in a game. A writer becoming the main character of a horror story he doesn't remember writing is an incredibly interesting concept on its own. Then you add in all the layers of the supernatural, the twists and turns, the memorable characters, and being an incredible love story about how much crap Alan is willing to go through to save his wife. Not only that, but being the Iron Man to launch the Remedy connected universe, which quickly became one of the most fascinating universes in gaming, it's really hard to find the proper balance to slay this demon. However, I think I've settled on Alan Wake getting a 7 out of 10. The story is incredible and really what people should play this game for. However, it's let down by gameplay that feels like a product of its time, with unrefined unrefined controls that can make the game get pretty annoying at times. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of the manuscript thing. I don't like reading spoilers for the game I'm playing in the game I'm playing. I get that it's Thomas Zane telling Alan what's going to happen, but it kind of diminishes the experience of actually seeing the events unfold. Though I did get around that on my first playthrough by just not reading the pages I found. Speaking of which, screw this game's collectibles. There are 298 collectibles and trophies to be found, because this game came out in that time of the early 2010s where every game had to be packed with collectibles whether it made sense or not. Manuscript pages? Makes sense. Hidden chests? Fair enough. Signs about the history of Bright Falls? I appreciate some good lore. Can pyramids? What? 100 fucking coffee thermoses that serve no purpose? Excuse me? This is a game carried by its story and a pretty killer soundtrack, though I'd say everyone should experience it once given how important it is. And just like that, the crazy events that unfolded in Bright Falls in 2010 are behind us. But the story is far from over. I've been reliably informed that it will happen again in a town called Ordinary. I hope to see you there.
Continue.